right, welcome back as I push buttons and turn dials. In this podcast episode, I paused and I sat down once again with Luke Resop, graduate student at Mississippi State University, to discuss how his project is going. Now, as you know, Luke's investigating conventional and regenerative food plotting practices, as well as old field management practices on 9 study sites in Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Missouri. While Luke and I discuss how some of his findings on these study sites match up with what I've seen on my PA farm and client properties all across the country, we also discuss turkeys. Who doesn't like talking turkey? In the late 90s, while at Mississippi State University, I was an undergrad student working as a technician on one of the coolest projects I've ever been a part of. Some fascinating, groundbreaking research on bobwhite quail. I was working under one of Dr. Westberger's graduate students, Mark Smith, now Dr. Mark Smith at Auburn University. Mark's research, which led to his doctoral degree, was published somewhere around 2005. Dr. Smith's research, along with that of Hurst, Palmer, and some other researchers, provide the groundwork for some incredibly new and fascinating turkey foraging efficiency research done at Mississippi State right now. Research we'll cover in a future podcast, and research that will no doubt help those of us who enjoy managing our properties for wild turkeys. The bobwhite study that I was a part of sought to investigate the use of imprinted or hand-raised northern bobwhite chicks to assess habitat-specific insect availability on properties in Mississippi. In other words, it was my job to hatch bobwhite quail eggs and imprint the chicks as though I was mama, and then forage them through various habitat types. Think field borders, row crop fields, fence rows, ditches, etc. I recall daily walks around the grass for 2 to 3 hours with a group of quail chicks. At the time, as I recall, they were about 3 to 10 days old. The grass yard was at the MSU Vet School grounds where we brooded the chicks. As they foraged on insects, tiny flowers, seeds, and plant matter, I'd walk around amongst the chicks and whistle with my lips, imprinting them to stick with me as we foraged. After a specific period of time, I'd collect the chicks, take them back to the brooder. We wanted the chicks to return to me in the wild once we decided to forage them for the last time. At a specific age, Mark and I performed ligature surgeries in the early morning hours so we could then take them out in the field later that afternoon after a full recovery to allow them to freely forage before collecting them, if you will. For the surgeries, of course, led by Mark, we used a scalpel to make a very small incision in the skin and access the crop and esophagus. We then used a metal probe to separate the crop and the esophagus from the surrounding connective tissues. We used a suture needle with a surgical thread attached to guide the thread around the esophagus immediately posterior to the crop. We'd then cinch the surgical thread down to the approximate size of the esophageal tube, tie it off with a good old-fashioned square knot. We'd use surgical glue to seal that incision and allow it to dry before returning the chicks back to the brooder to recover. In all, the surgeries took roughly 5 to 7 minutes each, and we hammered dozens of them out before heading to class for that day. This project was super cool. Mark was a great young teacher and boss, and I was able to earn enough money while working on that project to afford an engagement ring for my now bride of 24 years. That research was fascinating, and I can't wait to hear what lead investigator Will Fowler of MSU finds during his research on turkey poults in conventionally and regeneratively managed food plots. I can tell you what we see in our plots, and it's had a positive impact on turkey numbers at a property level. While I've heard one fellow colleague note on a turkey podcast recently that insects are rarely limited for the development of wild turkey poults, I think this is a misleading and short-sighted statement. I believe that insect diversity, species richness, and overall density is vital to the food chain. I've noticed, and so have many clients, that regenerative farming and food plotting practices lead to massive amounts of insects, and some insects we've never seen before, especially compared to chemically, conventionally managed plots where tillage and monoculture crops are the norm. Insects are a crucial part of essential amino acids and protein for growth, of course, feather development, and maintenance in chicks of all gallinaceous birds like turkeys, grouse, and quail. So Luke and I got together just to shoot from the hip here and see where the conversation takes us. These are some of my favorite conversations, and when I'm not in the field, I'm having these conversations with the managers, the scientists, and the inquisitive investigators whom I respect. I have no doubt that you will also enjoy this episode. But before we get started, I'd like to update you on a hugely positive change that has recently taken place on the Drop-Tine podcast, Drop-Tine Innovators podcast, I should say. And you don't have to do anything, and I'm sure many of you haven't even noticed. As many of you know, I first used a platform called Glow for the premium content version of this podcast, a version that so many of you are paying to support, and for that, I thank you. With my professional schedule being so busy with consulting and the Drop-Tine Seed Company, I had no choice but to introduce a listener-supported version of the Drop-Tine podcast. Episodes like this one between Luke and myself are the kind of content that I publish on the Innovators podcast. I'm also planning other podcast topics that aren't presented in the mainstream media because so many people are censored and forced to stick to politically correct topics, or they're fed what's called specific safe lines to use while discussing hot topic items like CWD, a topic that I've taken on deep in the weeds. While I do publish some of the content from the Innovators podcast to the free Drop-Tine podcast from time to time, that content is published in part, not full-length episodes. Unfortunately, as I build out the Innovators Premium Content podcast, Glow was experiencing several growing pain issues. On many occasions, they failed to publish episodes and delayed publishing them for up to a month. We called them, sat on hold, waited for emails to be returned. We submitted tickets without response. It was frustrating. I'm sure many of you go through this in your lives. I made the decision to migrate all of our subscribers over to a well-respected platform called Supercast. While we're still learning some of the new processes and features on Supercast, I'm starting to realize that this move will allow us to better serve our subscribers and supporters as the podcast continues to grow. This episode with Luke is the first episode published on the new Supercast platform. Now more than ever, I'd like to hear from you, the listeners and the supporters of this free speech podcast on all things wildlife science, wildlife management, hunting, and anything we enjoy talking about. Speaking of that, have you seen the latest spot price on gold? I hate to say that I told you so, but it's never too late to invest in true value if wealth preservation is of any interest. We're also excited to announce the AMAs or Ask Me Anything option on your Supercast account. Simply log into your Supercast account, find the AMA, or again, Ask Me Anything, and submit questions or comments. As a community, you can comment on what others have to say as well. Don't be bashful. I'd love to hear what everyone wants to talk about. I'll be building podcast episodes from your input. And we're also building a referral program, so for every listener you refer to the Innovators Premium Content Podcast, you receive discounts off your membership, and I'm personally super excited about other programs that we've been discussing to build our community here at the Drop-Tine podcast, including early talks about a video version of the podcast. To comment or ask a question about any of this or provide any feedback, please email me at jason@droptine.supercast.coma. I enjoy hearing from you. If you want to share this content with your friends and family, please send them to droptine.supercast.coma to sign up so they too can become a part of our community. Enjoy the show.
Yeah, so I should be clear when I say we here in this whole process, I mean that very loosely. I mean mostly Will and the technicians that are doing this. I get to enjoy it mostly from the sideline, which is the most enjoyable way to do it.
Yeah.
They imprint them for 10 days, and then once they're 10 days old, we take them to all of our we take them to our food plot and our old field treatment. So the food plots, obviously regenerative food plots, side by side with conventional food plots. And then we've also got our burning and our disking old field native plant community treatments. And we turn them loose in there and do the same thing where we, play the hen vocalization and just slowly walk in front of them, just kind of staying, 5 to 10 yards in front of them and let them do their thing. They forage, looking for insects and all sorts of critters and snails and seeds and plant material. And after 20 minutes, we scoop them all back up, and then we take them back to the lab, dissect their crops, pull out everything that's inside their crops, and we're mainly interested in insects, but we're also looking, seeds and other plant material. And we're partnering with our entomology department here at Mississippi State, and they're going to identify all of the insect samples for us to look at what they're eating, and we're going to get biomass weights just to kind of look at it, how each treatment, regenerative, conventional, old fields, how they influence insect abundance. And also what I think is just as, if not more important than the availability of insects, is how the turkeys can navigate the treatments to access those insects. So we're also looking at, turkey poult movement rate. So every, 1 or 2 minutes, I don't remember how often, but very often throughout the foraging trials, we are marking the location of the poults. And then we're using that as kind of a distance metric to look at foraging efficiency, essentially. So the idea being that it is better for a poult to get, I'm just making up numbers here, the idea being that it's better for a poult to get 10 bugs in 10 meters than 15 bugs in 20 meters.
Sure. Efficiency.
You know what I mean?
Foraging efficiency. Yep. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that intrigued me because, like I said, I guess it was maybe right around 2000, 2001, could have been 99, I don't know. When I worked with Dr. Berger's student, Mark Smith, who's now at Auburn, Mark and I did the surgeries, and it was a blast. I mean, we tied the ligature around the esophagus and obviously, took them out, foraged them. I'm pretty sure, as I remember, I just had a whistle that I did personally when I imprinted the birds. But one of the interesting things, and I actually pulled Mark's study, wasn't published. I'm sure you've read it. Wasn't published until 2005. But I remember the conservation, basically headlands or buffer strips, whatever you want to call them, they were brand new. They were newly established. So I think we had 3 different private tracts of land, as I recall, without going back through the paper. I don't think we were at Black Prairie at all. I don't really remember. But the interesting thing was it was all row crop primarily, so corn and beans. But the conservation headlands or the strips that were established, the buffer strips that were established, were less than 3 years old. So, and amongst conventional agriculture, right? So heavy tillage, obviously the use of insecticides, herbicides, monoculture, etc. So this fascinates me because you guys are now including that research, mixing it with your regenerative research. There's so much going on there; it almost makes your head spin.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And I don't want to steal from Will because I would like to have Will on, but the whole navigation part too. I know I watch poults and hens here at my place in some of my ugly stuff, and they don't seem to have any issues navigating in what the academics tell me they shouldn't be able to get through. So maybe mine are more robust than others, but
well, I will say I've been quite surprised at how tough a 10-day-old turkey poult is and how they can navigate through stuff. I mean, vegetation that looks pretty dang rank at ground level, they're able to navigate through. Now, I will say this. We're doing 20-minute foraging trials. So I think there's a lot of stuff that a 10-day-old poult can get through in the span of 20 minutes, where if you sustain that and repeat it over a 2, 3, 10-day period, I think that would certainly, have a much larger effect, and they wouldn't be able to sustain that. But I mean, they, if we're talking about getting from a high quality, bugging area to where they're going to, roost on the ground in the evening or whatever, and they got to navigate through some rank stuff. I mean, they can get through some pretty thick stuff as long as, this is my interpretation, as long as they don't have to go through it for really long, and they don't have to do it for a long distance and a long duration.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, I think our foraging with the quail chicks was 30 minutes, as I recall, and we had to make calls, about every 30 seconds, I think, just to keep them close.
So what did y'all find? I'm curious.
I mean, basically, I'd have to remark study. So my job was to incubate them, imprint them. I helped Mark perform the surgeries, which, like I said, was a blast, separating the crop from the esophagus, and then obviously the ligature. But essentially, one of the things they looked at was, because I don't know how it is at Mississippi State now, but they had a group of penned wild quail. If that makes any sense. And then we raised, like F1, F2, F3, we raised the chicks, imprinted them on my whistle. And essentially they were first of all, they were looking at the method, I think, more than anything of, is this a legitimate or a scientifically legit approach to studying, arthropod, I guess, availability, but they also looked at habitats. Mark looked at habitat-specific availability. Honestly, I graduated and got the hell out. So as far as the exact findings, I don't remember. I do remember reading the paper years later, and Mark said something, and again, I'm just, this is my recollection, something about there was a very small difference between what they called the conservation headlands or the buffer strips and the row crop. So picture soybean and corn. But in the margin of my copy in the paper, I wrote something along the lines of, less than 3 years, right? I mean, these strips were not really managed with fire. There wasn't any exclusion of, a buffer strip right next to a row crop, a conventionally, if you were, chemically managed row crop field is really not necessarily a true buffer strip most of the time, because you got drift, and I know they were spraying insecticides and herbicides, and again, it's only 2-3 years old, so I think your study is probably, I'm sure you guys have strips or sections that have actually seen fire, maybe are a little bit older than 2 or 3 years. I don't know, but he was comparing the row crop. Basically, at that time, there was winter disking, et cetera, of the conservation headlands. I call them. That might be a European term. Buffer strips, whatever.
Yeah, I call them buffer strips.
Yeah, same thing. But I think the inclusion of, I don't know why we're calling it regenerative, but maybe stealing a little bit of farming practices from nature, or ecological farming, if you will, minimizing those conventional or chemical tools. That to me is much more relevant than what we did. But I remember Palmer did. I'm sure you've read Palmer's work. He did a lot of work on this, and there were guys, back in the late '80s.
Yeah, he's very familiar with all of that literature. I will say, to your point about the, having burned and, done some soil disturbance of those old fields to promote a more, to promote a different plant community structurally and compositionally, and it's been several years since we've run fire through it. One of the things that we are incorporating into Will's project with turkey pulp foraging is we're also doing DVAC sampling, which I'm sure you are familiar with, but just for everyone else who's not, we're essentially going out there and throwing down a 35-gallon trash can with the bottom cut off, and we've got a leaf vacuum, and we've got essentially a giant tea bag inside the pickup tube and the leaf vacuum, and we're sucking all through that trash can and sucking up all of the invertebrates that are inside that trash can sampling frame. And what that gives us is a measure of what is present, what is available in each treatment, and then we're using the turkey pulse to tell us what is used. So it's a use versus availability thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the very interesting things to me, and Will and I have talked about this some, but it would be, he would be able to elaborate, I think, more than I could. But one of the really interesting things to me is that we, just anecdotally, because we're still processing our first year of data and we still got a whole nother year of the project, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just preliminary. But one of the things that we are noticing so far is that it seems there are a lot more invertebrates in the DVAC samples than there are than the turkey pulps have access to. And our interpretation of that, which I think makes a lot of sense, is a lot of those invertebrates are inhabiting the vegetation where there's a lot of green foliage. And if we're talking about an old field that was burned, the old fields that we're using in Will's project were burned winter, not this past winter, but the previous winter. So it's been essentially 2 growing seasons now since they've seen a fire. And so a lot of the vegetation in those old fields, one, there are a lot of perennial plants, and the structure is, we're talking about it can conceal an adult deer standing up. So a lot of the dense foliage and the vegetation is, at least knee high to me, if not chest high to me. And that is way over the head of a 4 to 6 inch tall turkey pole.
Mm-hmm.
So while I think there are a lot of insects in those old field treatments, that doesn't necessarily mean that the pulps have access to those insects. So what I think will be very interesting is when we rerun our foraging trials next year, it is going to be, by the time we rerun this next summer at the time when turkey pulps are on the ground, it is going to be 2 or 3 months post-disturbance, because we're going to disc and we're going to burn our different old field treatments this winter. So we're going to kind of get a 2 time frame look at how timing of management influences insect availability for turkey poults. Because by the time we get to May, June next year, when poults will be on the ground, in our fire treatments, in our fire old field treatments that have just gotten prescribed burned, that vegetation is going to be 6 to 12 inches tall, not 12 to 60 inches tall. So I think that's going to make a big difference in terms of where the insects are in relation to a pulp's little mouth.
Good point. Yep. Just because they're there doesn't mean that they're available. That's good stuff.
Yep.
Well, good deal. I think that, like I said, I don't know if we were on a phone call or if you mentioned it in text, and I said we should podcast, but I don't want to steal too much of Will's thunder on that. But I do like that it's being obviously piggybacked in a complementary fashion. We talk about deer all the time, but I know when I'm out of my place, one of my primary objectives is turkeys, and I'm constantly observing how they're using my fields, both uninterrupted, and then when they get bumped or pushed by either me or like bird of prey or something. It fascinates me how, like you said, how quickly they bury in some nasty rank stuff if they have to. So
they're amazing and very resilient little critters. I mean, I'm obviously talking about the poults right now, not the hens. They're very resilient too, but I mean, you'd think that fresh turkey poult would be super fragile, and you'd really need to baby them to get them to survive. And to some extent, that's obviously true, because if they get eaten by a raccoon or a possum or a snake or something, they're dead, or a red-tailed hawk. But I mean, they're pretty resilient little critters.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been very impressed with them. It's an awesome learning opportunity just to watch them and how they behave and forage and what they do and how they move and how they respond to a plane flying overhead, and they all just kind of lock up and freeze.
I remember we lost when we started it. There really wasn't any research that looked at human imprinted birds. And Mark and I were like, how many should we forage at a time? And, I could remember foraging up to 24 just at the vet school in the lawn there, and never losing any, obviously, because you didn't have anywhere for them to go. But as soon as we started taking that many to the field, in soybean fields or whatever, I can remember losing some, and we were like, all right, this isn't going to work. And I don't know if something killed them or if they just, who knows, they could have fell in something. But I think we ended up, I want to say like half a dozen, maybe a few more. But I actually just pulled it out. I had it in a stack of papers because I knew we were going to talk about this. And just briefly looking, there's under the results, it says arthropod. Now, again, this is quail chicks, so there is a distinction between poults and quail chicks. But arthropod consumption declined as distance from the field edge increased. I think one would expect that. But there is also some stuff in here that says there really was no major difference between the field borders and the row crop. And again, I kind of liken that back to the fact that it's only 2-3 years that and I remember some fire back then, but mostly disking.
Yeah.
So I think the management is key. But anyway.
Yep, I 100% agree.
Good deal. Well, we'll cover some more of that later. I'm looking forward to hearing more field seasons as Will gets more of those data. That's going to be fun.
Yeah, and the other thing that I didn't mention here, and I'm not trying to steal Will's thunder by any means, but the other thing that I think is really unique about the way that he's running this project is we're looking at early hatch and late hatch. So we're running one set of trials, early June, late May, early June, essentially, when you'd expect your first round of turkey poults to be on the ground. And then we're running another set of trials 5.5-ish weeks later, when you would expect if a hen had a failed nest and she re-nested and successfully hatched another round of poults, we're running another round then. Because, I mean, if you think about how a food plot, especially a warm season food plot planted in April, May, by the time you get to June, its structure is going to be, obviously it depends on what you plant, lots of different things, but the structure in early June is going to be very different than the structure by the time you get to early July. So I think that's a really cool way that we're looking at this, and how different food plot or old field treatments change over the course of just a growing season, let alone a couple of years.
Oh, for sure. And obviously, regional difference matters, but I guess speaking contextually for where you are and thinking about where I am or my farm in Pennsylvania, especially if you think about it like a winter, a cool season annual, if you've got, the cereals coming back with hairy vetch climbing up, or some, Austrian winter peas, etc., those cool season annuals can put on a boatload of biomass between late May, early June, and then 5.5 weeks later.
Yeah.
I know. Yep. I've had some people question, hairy vetch is a fun plant to use, puts a pile of nitrogen into the ground, responds very, very much differently regionally, but then also over time. So like in Iowa, I've got some clients where we've backed off after several years of using it because doing so well. But I watched the fawn, I bumped the fawn on my farm, and I was concerned. I thought at one point that he was going to get strangled in the hairy vetch. Now, again, they're more resilient than we give them credit for, so he got out of it. But I kind of half chased him like a predator would just to see what he would do, and he was able to bed down and get below, the tangled. If anyone's ever walked across a thick hairy vetch field, they know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't, don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, you do that for a couple days in a row, and like those muscles right on the inside of your groin get really sore because you're just dragging your boots through it. It's so tough to get through.
You want to give us an update on some of your cool stuff you're doing? Just 30,000 feet or whatever you want to do, whatever you want to dig in?
Yeah, we can. So let's see, we planted our first round of food plot treatments in spring of 2023. So we're now in the middle of our, let's see, spring 23, 24, 25.
Yeah, so
we're now in the middle of our third growing season of our warm season food plot treatments.
Right. So it's August. It's August of 25 when we're recording this for reference.
Yep. So we planted spring 23, 24, 25. So we're now in the middle of our third growing season of our food plot treatments. And we're obviously managing warm season and cool season treatments.
Yeah.
And I guess just to give people a kind of a recap of the rough study design of how this is organized, we've got 9 study sites. We've got 4 in Mississippi, various soil regions, everything from deep sandy soils in South Mississippi to the Mississippi Delta, extremely rich alluvial soils, to kind of the rolling hills of North Mississippi. We got a study site in Arkansas. We got 2 in Tennessee, one just south of Nashville. So it's kind of real rocky, rolling foothills kind of stuff. We got one up in close to Knoxville. So that is very much so Cumberland Plateau, Appalachia, high elevation. And then we've got 2 in Missouri. And those are, classic Midwest ag landscape, lots of corn and soybeans in every direction. So we've got a very wide range of soil types and deer densities and management practices, past land use, all sorts of things to look at and tease apart here. So on each study site, we have got 5 food plot treatments and 4 old field treatments. So we've got 9 treatments on 9 study sites. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. So our food plot treatments, we've got 3 conventional food plot treatments. And when I say conventional, that is just what you think of with a traditional, conventional row crop agricultural field. We manage our food plots the same way with tillage and herbicide and synthetic fertilizers based on soil tests, etc. And then in the same field, side by side, we've got 2 regenerative treatments. And one of those regenerative treatments, we use no herbicide, no fertilizer, no tillage. We're planting our cool season food plot directly into the standing biomass of the warm season, and we're using roller crimping as appropriate to kind of crimp terminate the previous crop. And then we've got another side-by-side regenerative treatment where we are using herbicides as we deem it necessary to maximize establishment of planted species and control weed competition. So we've kind of got a gradient of regenerative quote treatments going on, where one of them we're using no synthetic inputs, and one of them we're using herbicide as necessary to control weeds and promote maximum establishment of planted species. And then our conventional treatments, we've got, a conventional warm season plot that gets planted in the spring, and then it's fallow in the fall and winter. We've got a conventional cool season plot that's planted in the fall, and then we've got some late maturing clovers in there. So it's kind of cranking through, mid to late summer even. And then we've got one of our conventional treatments that it gets planted twice per year. So it gets twice the tillage, twice the fertilizer, twice the herbicide. So essentially what we've got is we've got a gradient of conventional management intensity, where we've got, some that are getting dissed and fertilized and herbicide once a year, one that's getting it twice a year. And we've got a gradient of regenerative, one that's getting no synthetic inputs ever at all under any circumstance, and one that is getting herbicide as necessary to control weeds. And then I know that's a lot of detail, but let me just breeze over the old fields. Breeze over the old fields real quick. We've got 4 different old field treatments. We've got 2 of our old field treatments that are burned biennially, so every other year in the dormant season, and 2 of them that are dissed biennially every other year in the dormant season. And one of the disking treatments we're spraying to control non-native plants, invasive plants, even native plants that we think there are too much of or that are too dense to promote diversity. And one of the disking treatments, it's not getting any herbicide. Same thing in the fire. One of them is getting sprayed, one of them is not getting sprayed. And in each of these treatments, food plot and old field, we're monitoring. You should see the soil response spreadsheets that I've got. We've got like 87 or 89 different soil response variables we're looking at through the soil lab that's measuring them, and we're monitoring those multiple times throughout the year. We're monitoring plant biomass production of planted species. We're looking at biomass production of weeds. We're looking at nutritional quality of species, of common species in each treatment. So, for example, we're looking at the nutritional quality of a deer vetch plant in a conventional treatment relative to the quality of that deer vetch plant in the side-by-side regenerative treatment. We're looking at deer and turkey use with trail cameras. We're looking at economics, so how much time, how much money, how much diesel fuel, how much, all the way down the list does it require to manage each of these treatments, and how does that translate to deer and turkey use? So one of the kind of economic metrics that I think is very interesting is our deer and turkey use per dollar, or deer and turkey use per hour invested. So if we invest just to standardize the units, if we invest $1 in all of these treatments, in all the food plot treatments, all the old field treatments, how many turkey detections does that get us on a daily basis? I think that's kind of a neat way to standardize and look at, bang for your buck, essentially. So we've got Will stuff going on, obviously, with the turkey poult foraging stuff. So we are, like I said, in the third year of the project, and I'm going to plant cool season food plots this fall. And on some of the study sites, I'm going to plant another round of warm season next spring, and then that's it for the project. So I'm not by any means saying that we are exhaustively looking at this. I mean, because it's a huge question. The question of regenerative versus conventional management, it is so complex and so many variables and so many things to account for. And so I'm not at all saying that after, a 3 or 4 year PhD project, we're going to have the answers solved. But I think we have a very good representation of what a landowner can expect in various contexts if they want to manage conventionally or regeneratively in a typical scenario.
And is that return there for them, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
You're looking at the economics. Did you spend any time looking at time invested?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay. Good.
Yep. We've got that.
Yeah.
And obviously the time it requires to manage a conventional food plot, we're averaging, I have to pull up the numbers here from some of my analyses, but we're averaging somewhere around 10 to 13 hours per acre per year for a conventional food plot. And we're averaging 2 to 5 hours per acre per year for a regenerative food plot. So conventional food plots are certainly taking a lot more time to manage than a regenerative food plot is.
Yeah, and many people understand, like, time to me is my most precious asset. So time is money. If obviously, if you have anything in life that pays, so that intrigues me the most. I was going to ask you. There were about 10 questions I had jotted down. So okay, that's a lot. That was a great summary. Zooming back from that, if you're sitting here with a beer in your hand or whatever you drink, and somebody says, pick out at this point in time, August of 2025, what's one thing, and if you feel so inclined to mention 2 or 3, and I'm not saying we're going to hold you to this, or that these are going to be the same, amazing observations you'll make, 4 years from now, or even 2 years from now when the project's done. What has sort of happened? Because as much as you try to go into something like this as completely independent thinking as you can, it's just not human nature. So what is something that comes to mind? And it may not be number one, but just something immediately that comes to mind that most surprised you, that you've sort of, I guess, run into by accident and thought, wow, I never really expected that.
Well, one of the really interesting things to me, and this is, I'll give it from both sides. I'll make an observation that I think is in favor of regenerative treatments in general, and then I've got an observation that's kind of the opposite, that I think it's a challenge or an obstacle to regenerative management food plots. So the one that is in favor of it, we've got, like I said, study sites all over the place. And a couple of our study sites are in ag heavy landscapes. So soybeans as far as the eye can see.
Hey guys, Jason here. We're about 30 minutes into a fantastic podcast episode, and we're about to dig deeper into the weeds on food plotting regeneratively using far fewer costly inputs while saving massive amounts of time. That right there is my personal favorite benefit. Of course, compared to conventional management with monoculture crops, heavy chemical use, and recreational tillage, and of course, many more practices. You know, we love the fact that you are tuning into the free public version of the Drop-Tine podcast. And, you know, we know you have options because there are some great podcasts out there. In fact, as podcast geeks ourselves, we listen to most of them as well. However, we're fully aware that we are one of the few podcasts that is in the position to speak unapologetically and be completely truthful and honest, since we can't offend anyone who pay the bills. And of course, we're not in the tank with anyone who requires us to lean one way or the other. You know, there's still 48 minutes left to this podcast episode. It's chock full of beneficial knowledge drops. So let me explain how you can become a Drop-Tine Innovator and unlock everything we publish here on the Drop-Tine podcast, as well as engage in the Drop-Tine community. I'm going to share a quick story about my personal research into those podcasts that succeed and those that fail. You know, I've had the opportunity to meet some super successful podcast hosts in the last 10 years, and not all of them are still running. They all mention, however, that they never imagined how much work keeping a successful podcast afloat would be, and I agree completely. The truth is, we all get excited about sharing our knowledge, our guests, and our experiences, but then we all hit this wall once we realize the incredible amount of time and preparation that is required to thrive as a podcast host. Behind the scenes, we research prospective guests, we study their backgrounds, we talk to references, of course, we're vetting, we're conducting due diligence, we're checking into their character and their work. Is there anything we're missing? We then have discussions with prospective guests to qualify them as guests, and honestly, some of these prospective guests get uncomfortable, and understandably so in today's world, and they request to simply back out. Who can blame them? Fortunately, there's not too many of them, but it certainly happens. And in my opinion, if we're not finding these individuals, we're not pushing the limits. You know, in fact, some of my favorite episode ideas haven't even come to fruition because we're still working on making the guest feel comfortable about recording a podcast. Two guests I'd love to have on the podcast are still in court cases right now, and several have expressed that they must retire before they can offer full honesty on a recorded podcast. And I feel that these types of guests must be heard, as their messages are vital to our understanding of hot button topics I'll throw out like chronic wasting disease. You can head over to droptine.supercast.com. That's droptine.supercast.com. Just punch that into your favorite search engine, where you can subscribe for just $15 a month, or you can save 17% by paying for a full year. That's $150 for 12 months of full access, full premium content. I'm going to read off many of the benefits, but right off the bat, one of my favorite benefits that we've just added recently, and this is a benefit to becoming an Innovator member, is our AMAs, or Ask Me Anything, where you can ask questions or make comments in our community on your Supercast account, right there with the Drop-Tine podcast. Do you want to hear from guests who can lay out the information on why we're actually working backwards on the CWD debacle? Or how do you determine if you truly have too many deer or not enough deer? Why are some of my colleagues aligning politically with state agencies and nonprofit organizations to serve as political extensions and promote particular agendas that are not to the benefit of the sportsmen or the wildlife we love. Just drop a question or a comment in the AMA section and we'll begin innovating. I'll personally build content around what you, the listeners, show interest in. You know, we're constantly adding benefits as we build out our community, but some of the benefits to being a Drop-Tine Innovator include, and this is other than the AMAs, ad-free premium content, deeper dives from innovators who obviously more thoroughly cover key topics in wildlife science, hunting, and property management. And you've heard many of these. Exclusive member-only content, just like the remaining 48 plus minutes of this particular episode with Luke. Uncensored, investigative deer and wildlife journalism. Absolutely zero advertiser-driven sales and marketing content. This one drives me crazy when I'm paying for premium content like ESPN Plus, and I still get marketing garbage. It's vital for most podcasts if they're to stick around for the long haul, quite frankly, because managing a podcast, like I said, it gets expensive. However, with you as the supporter of the podcast, we don't have to advertise. Region-specific content that benefits our Drop-Tine Innovators across the country, I think, is a super cool benefit. You know, we can be politically incorrect if it means being brutally honest, that is. I enjoy relentlessly spotlighting junk science and regulatory or corporate capture, and quite frankly, I've left much of that off the podcast, but there's much, much more there on the table to consume. We want to do more bonus episodes, exclusive access to future interactive and video content, and exclusive access to new product announcements. Explanations and discussions on all aspects of wildlife management and ecology led by myself after 25 years of serving as a self-employed private wildlife consultant. Finally, for those who have patiently listened to all this, what do you think about me interviewing some of the people who I'm known to disagree with or even not get along with in my profession? After all, in today's world, I think many more of us need to sit down, regardless of what our differences of opinions are, or political beliefs, and just have conversations to the benefit of you, the content consumer. I'm willing to invite anyone. I can't promise they'll accept the challenge, but wouldn't it be a major benefit to all of us if I sit down with those with different views and opinions on all things wildlife management, hunting, politics, etc.? I'm game if our community of innovators is also game. So just type in droptine.supercast.com in any web browser, even your least favorite Google. That's droptine.supercast.com and subscribe today. Once you become a Drop-Tine Innovator member, I'd like to be the first to welcome you. So just shoot me an email at jason@droptinepodcast.com and tell me that you're a new innovator, and we'll start cranking up the conversation and learning together.